A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Wonderful to have you with us on this Friday edition of 2020. Tomorrow, a very significant day, the Western Australian state election. And Western Australian voters getting ready to line up at the ballot box tomorrow. And this election will determine members for both the Legislative Assembly and the WA Upper House, known as the Legislative Council. Pre-poll voting actually opened almost 2 weeks ago, and lots of WA residents have already cast their vote. Predictions are that Labor will win convincingly, but a narrower majority. Well, some more guest commentators joining us through this hour, and I might make a special welcome to Maryka Groenwald, who leads the Australian Christians Party in WA. Maryka, a special welcome to you.
So good to be with you, Neil.
And Darryl Budge joining us. Darryl is the Family Voice Australia Western Australian State Director. Darryl, welcome along.
Great to be with you, Neil.
Let me start with you, Maryka, because, boy, this has been a big week for you, and the likelihood that others are saying, commentators are saying this left, right and centre, it looks like you might finally get across the line and get into an upper house seat in the Western Australian Legislative Council. But you've had a dreadful week, even emergency surgery this week. I don't know, just let us in on that if you're able.
Oh, my goodness. Look, I don't know how people do it without God's grace. But yes, it's been a very interesting week. Actually, after a candidate forum last week, found myself having to get my appendix removed. So in the midst of campaigning and candidate forums and recovery, it was quite unexpected, but getting stronger every day and obviously still supporting the team from afar. But quite unexpected, but just so grateful for God's grace through all of this, really.
It's been very challenging for you, and the victory will be very sweet if tomorrow night you're across the line. Hey,
absolutely.
Darryl, you've been one of those who's been predicting that the Australian Christians will have a good showing in the election tomorrow, and you've been saying basically best chance ever. You still staying with that?
Yes, definitely best chance ever. Maryka knows all about this, that they now can capture the whole of the state in the upper house. So there is a significant number of Christians all throughout our beautiful WA state. So I'm anticipating they will get the 2.6 percentage that they need for at least one. And we hope for two. We can always pray for two.
Let me ask you about some changes that are happening, and I'll ask this of you, Darryl, because there's some administrative changes to the way the election happens. Voting procedures for the Legislative Council, choosing to vote above the line or below the line on the ballot paper. About those changes, what is it that will perhaps benefit most those people like Maryka who'll be on the ballot form?
Yeah, that's correct. It has changed a little bit in that you're voting for what the Labor government calls one vote, one value. You're voting for all the representatives that are up for election across the whole WA state, and to give the best chance for people like Maryka and the Australian Christians Party, you've got to number every box either above the line, which is every single party and the independents. So they have a groupings and a social groupings. You've got to number every box. Otherwise, if you don't number every box, your vote may exhaust. And probably the best chance for electing really good people is to actually even go below the line and number every box below the line. And obviously, you're talking about 50, 60 odd names to number. But you can actually choose the best candidates from the major parties as well that reflect our values. And so voting below the line is a great option as well. So just one big thing for people to remember is number every box and to specifically research each party, and we'll get into some details about how we know where the parties stand.
The best candidates, no matter what the party. And let me ask you, though, Maryka, Australian Christians, and you've been battling for many, many, many years to get across the line. There is a good opportunity tomorrow when Western Australians go to the polls. But some people wonder, if I vote for Australian Christians, will my vote be wasted? It isn't the case, though. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, look, I've often said to people, the way that the system's geared up with the preferential system, it's never a wasted vote if you vote according to your values first. So for us, again, in the upper house, we make some recommendations and encourage people to vote above the line and enough boxes so that that vote doesn't exhaust. But what people have often thought is, oh, great, I'll vote for a major party first, then go to the minors, not realising that that is a complete waste. So, of course, what I've said to people, look, don't take my word for it. This is the way the system works, that if you vote for a party like AC First, for example, your vote still has the capacity, especially in the lower house, to end up with the most aligned or conservative candidate. So it's not actually a wasted vote. It doesn't exhaust in the lower house. There's actual real benefit of making sure the Christian vote is strong across all electorates. It's not a waste.
Darryl, Budge, tomorrow the likelihood is that Labor is going to be returned to government. I mean, there's a lot of hope that there might be some change of government coming from Conservative quarters. The likelihood is Labor's going to be returned. I wonder if you've got a reflection on what that looks like, because with the incredibly woke agenda of the WA Labor government, some people will be very worried about that.
Yeah. So the Labor Party has actually made several statements of they are committed to introducing some kind of conversion suppression bill on gender and sexuality issues. That means that they'll bring up a bill about banning what they call conversion therapy. They will bring up a bill to increase surrogacy access for people, single males and homosexual men in a couple relationship. And they've just committed to a bunch of things. And also, I think, want to revise the Equal Opportunity Act and remove the right of faith-based schools to hire and administer staff according to the values of the community of parents that go to that school. So they're going to, in their first year, I think, will bring many of those things straight up. And so it's going to look, not great for Christian people in WA. But we pray that the upper house and people like Maryka being elected will mean that they will be able to block and revise and push back on such legislation. So it's very important that people choose to vote very wisely in the upper house, because that means we could actually stop some of this stuff.
Maryka, what have you been hearing around the hustings when you've been out campaigning and you've travelled far and wide? What are the issues that Christian voters are bringing to your attention, and then voters in general? What's the feeling out there?
Yeah, look, you've got your stock standard issues, which of course are crucial, the housing crisis, cost of living. And of course, people know that those things are really important. But for us, I know even within the faith-based community in WA, which pretty much makes up a predominant amount of the state, people are worried about, again, the gender ideologies. They're worried about what kids are being taught in schools. They're worried about our schools, and as Darryl pointed out earlier, the ability for schools to be able to maintain and preserve that incredible foundation and the ethos that they teach with. There are so many core things, I think, when it comes to those core Christian values around life, preserving life from conception to natural death. Like, these are things that a lot of people care deeply about. And of course, we really haven't seen any of the other parties talk about, again, these core things. So for me, it's been a mixed bag, but the core values remain, and that is that people absolutely want to protect their children, they want the best for their families, they want the freedom to do so, and they want actually a state that cares about the sanctity of life.
Darryl, Budge, tomorrow the outcome in the upper house, there would be the very, very strong possibility, as we're talking about that today, Australian Christians getting over the line. But how do you think a balance of power arrangement might look in the WA upper house? Is there an ideal way it should look? What do you think is going to be the outcome?
The ideal would be that the Labor actually has to have conservative people from the Australian Christians and even from the Liberal Party that they actually have to negotiate with on bills, and that would stop some of this legislation agenda that they have, but also would amend that legislative agenda. So it's very important that people vote carefully, and I think we need to be careful that I'm very heartened. I will just point out on the Babies Born Alive issue, I'm very heartened the Australian Christians have provided such leadership on this for such a long time in bringing action on this abortion issue. So we need to stop babies being born alive and left to die in our state. And now we see some Conservative candidates and a major party like the Liberal Party actually talking action on this, like Dr. Tom Brutt down in Albany. So it's been really good that we see a changing of the conversation, because the Australian Christians are able to forthrightly bring Christian values into the public space. And then we're seeing some movement from quite lackadaisical parties that are kind of late to really tackling these tough issues. Obviously, very important Christian issues that we must protect life from conception to natural death. But it's good to see that the Liberal Party is changing slowly. We're looking forward to them changing a lot more and actually having a platform that fully reflects protection of life from conception to natural death.
Maryka, Groenwald, one of the criticisms people sometimes have of Christians in a Christian party, like Australian Christians, is that perhaps you're not as strong on the economic policies as you might be on those ethical, social policies. Have you been campaigning on economic policies as well as these social issues?
Oh, absolutely. And I think this is often, and we get this in candidate forums all the time, you know, our biggest asset is that we bring that scrutiny and balance to the upper house. So, of course, there's much more to it than, of course, those core values of life, faith, family, freedom. But even when you look at strengthening the issue of family and wraparound services around that, you know, that's an economic issue, but you've got to start with strengthening family. So I often think it's not a matter that these are things that we only deal with. The scope is so much broader, and I reckon it's going to be great to be able to have some input in the upper house where there is that opportunity to scrutinise and be really diligent about the legislation, be diligent about policies, and even bringing forth some you know, different ideas, different policy positions. So absolutely, I think it's core things, absolutely, but look forward to actually bringing a better balance and perhaps new ideas as well to some of those other issues too.
And Maryka, you're clearly got your sights set on getting that upper house seat. What about the Legislative Assembly? Have you had candidates standing all around WA for the Legislative Assembly as well as the Legislative Council?
Yeah, look, I think by the major parties, we're sort of the biggest party here fielding the most amount of candidates. There's, 54 candidates across WA, incredible people from all the way from Zoe in Kununurra to Garrett and Albany. They're just incredible. Again, solid people, not only family is the main thing, but just really love their community, love serving their community. So whilst we might not get a lower house seat yet, we're definitely working towards it. And honestly, the figures just keep increasing every election. So that's very encouraging.
And let me just talk resources for a few moments. Last hour, we were talking about the resources that are available from the Australian Christian Lobby. They've got their WA Votes website and also the one-page snapshot with green ticks and red crosses and a few question marks on there from the Australian Christian Values Checklist as they've evaluated the WA election. Let me just quickly ask you, because you've got some resources on your website too, Darryl Budge, Family Voice Australia, familyvoice.org.au. What will people see when they go to your website?
Yes, they will see both at familyvoice.org.au, they will see both of those Christian value checklists there. They're easy to access, but also have a Vote Wisely, which kind of explains in longer text form the major positions of the Liberal, Labor parties and the Australian Christians Party by standout comparison. Just explains the key issues on life and family issues, freedom for schools, freedom for churches, things like that. So it just explains in a very simple text form, so you can actually have a conversation with people. I think very much we need more word of mouth, people having some really good, deep conversations about what kind of government they want and what kind of freedom that they want in their community. And I think Australian Christians have been doing a fantastic job, and I really commend Maryka's hard work on all of this. And yeah, so those resources are there. I've just sent out an email to our database just now, this afternoon, to remind them about these resources.
And Maryka, on the Australian Christians Party website, australianchristians.org.au, you don't have the sort of things that others are doing with comparisons, but you've simply got your policy outlines on there. And I've got to say, they're looking good because the commentators are giving you all sorts of green ticks for ticking all the right boxes. What will people see when they visit your website? Is it also a resource for understanding what Australian Christians stand for in Western Australia?
Absolutely. And look, it's such a changing world, isn't it? We've got people accessing our website for information. There's people interacting and engaging all the time through social media. So, of course, a lot of info going through there. But yes, we fine-tuned it a lot. And of course, there are substantial, policy positions that sit behind all these statements. They're just position summaries, but a lot of these things have been well thought through, have been well prayed through, as every policy should be. So there'd be a good mix of not only responding to some latest news items on there, but definitely some of our key position statements as well.
Well, our special guests this hour, Maryka Groenwald, who leads the Australian Christians Party in WA, and Darryl Budge is with us too. He's Family Voice Australia, Western Australian State Director. We're going to return and talk some more about the Western Australian state election. It's on tomorrow. Back with more in just a few moments. Our special focus, as has become our tradition, that when there is a state election, we want to do a preview and invitations to our Christian commentators to be able to give us insights into what's happening on the ground in electorates around the elections. And of course, tomorrow, Western Australia's turn to be off to the polls. And by tomorrow night, there's likely to be insight into what the new Western Australia might look like. There are those who are hopeful for a change of government. It's probably not likely, but we're talking through these issues and bringing some level of a Christian commentary to the sorts of things that are going on in Western Australia. If I was talking about what might happen with legislation that has been held back, or the sorts of policy positions held back before an election that may be a concern for Christian voters after an election. Maryka Groenwald, what are you aware of that Labor might be planning if they are re-elected?
Yeah, look, and Darryl has been in this fight for as long as I have with some of these bills, but of course, the big thing, as a lot of people generally understand, is second-term Labor terms are often about social policy. So they're going to be tackling things like changes to the surrogacy legislation. So there has been murmurs around this since pretty much they changed the Marriage Act. But the key changes, of course, for WA is to allow single males to have access to children, same-sex couples to have access to children, and of course that just then changes the whole landscape around altruistic surrogacy, commercial surrogacy. So that's going to be a really, really big thing. And then the second bill, which has been ongoing in conversations since 2023 really, has been Labor's atrocious abortion reforms. So big issues there, not only around the lack of support available, but the lack of counselling available for women. They've obviously removed even pregnancy support centres being on government brochures, on websites. So there just seems to be this complete lack of understanding and caring that this issue does affect a lot of people. And you don't have to be a Christian to be pro-life. You don't have to be, of a particular ideology even to appreciate that in WA, we've got WA West Aussies who are not being treated with the dignity they deserve. And so I think this is going to be a really, really big issue going forward for a lot of Christians and conservatives.
Darryl Budge, when we hear of this next, perhaps you could call it extreme movement, surrogacy. It's almost like some around the rest of the nation might be thinking WA just follows Victoria and some other woke states around these sorts of issues, but surrogacy in all of those forms that we're just hearing now from Maryka, that sounds pretty serious.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it basically means that they'll have access to IVF treatments. So homosexual men and single men can have access to that. Now, Nick Goran for a long time has campaigned against that and obviously made the Labor government shelve it for a while. But it's now coming back to say that the Labor government wants to bring it in. They want to give this hat tip to the LGBTI community. And it just basically means that we're cutting off children from their basic biological right to have a mother and a father, and to be raised by a mother-father, which is the best situation possible for them. We know the outcomes, we know the surveys, we know the research on this. It's very clear that it's obviously damaging to a child, that they're deliberately separated, not through a circumstance or chance or some tragic circumstance, but that's been deliberately chosen, that a child is ripped away from their own biological mother and their own biological father and given to a completely different situation.
These things are challenging, and if Labor wins government again tomorrow night, that's the sort of thing that WA voters might be expecting. Hey, let me ask you about the leaders. You've got Roger Cook vying for a third Labor term in office. You've got the Liberal leader, Libby Mettam, who's the more likely to be opposition leader tomorrow night. But Libby Mettam, fifth Liberal leader since the former Premier Colin Barnett quit after the party lost back in 2017. Let me ask you about your impressions of Roger Cook. I mean, his predecessor, Mark McGowan, was like bulletproof, but what about Roger Cook? Is he bulletproof? What are your thoughts here, Maryka?
Yeah, look, and again, I'm a fan of fighting with the facts. You know, we don't get sort of stuck into the argy-bargy of it, but I think there really is a sentiment that Labor have got such an arrogance in WA, and people are actually so put off by it. And this is across the board. You know, the fact that the health system here is in shambles. Our ambulance ramping is beyond belief. Labor really, I can't understand how people can't see this more clearly, but they're on the nose when you talk to a lot of people, yet obviously, you know, the polls show otherwise. But that's certainly been my impression. There is an arrogance there. There is almost a disregard for, again, process and diligence when it comes to policy. And I guess Liberals, being the small team they are, trying to catch up with it all and trying to navigate through this. We know that, McGowan was a bit bulletproof, and of course that is still sort of making its way through the community. But things are changing. That's definitely been the sentiment I've gotten over the last couple of months as well.
Darryl, Budge, the Liberals have had such a small representation, though. Out of sight, out of mind. Is that the case, or is there a mood that you might be sensing in WA that there might be a really big bounce back tomorrow?
Yeah, I think the cost of living issues are really, really biting very, very hard. And for whatever reason, the Labor at the federal level and at the state level are both looking very, very bad for the individuals, particularly in WA. The inflation is out of control. Everyone's really struggling. People can't pay their mortgages. So therefore, there is going to be a definite swing, even apart from the values that we've been talking about, definite swing against the Labor Party, because they know that they want to see a different way of government happening. And it starts at the state level, something that actually invested in small business, invested in the family, invested in actually boosting people's ability to afford a basic standard of living. And it seems like the Labor government's not wanting to do much about the housing issue that's really meaningful. I find that the federal Labor and state level are basically just giving more money to very large investment organisations to build more houses, rather than enabling people to be able to afford to even have a house for themselves, put a roof over their head for their family, and to be able to have a circumstance where they can afford to have more children as they so choose. And I just find there is an arrogance, as Maryka has said, that they're not really invested in listening to people, what are their pain and pinch points, and actually doing something about it at the most local level possible.
Maryka, let me ask you about what you're hearing from the electorate, whether it's a different set of values that people in the city are holding there in Perth, or into the wheat belt, or into mining areas, up into the Pilbara. What sort of differences are there in the way that people are expecting things to eventuate tomorrow?
Oh, look, the issues are so vast, Neil. I mean, we've got, for example, one of our candidates, I was up there last year, up in Kununurra, in the Kimberleys, and of course we've got a lot of communities there struggling with a plethora of issues. There is, issues around families and addictions. It is massive. Then, of course, you're venturing into your regions, where farmers are really concerned about even the firearms bill in WA and the fact that Labor have just ran through this bill through Parliament without any proper consultation. It's just so ill-conceived. So, of course, a lot of people are worried about that, the live export bans. And then, of course, as Darryl said, you're sort of coming closer to home where literally everyday families are just trying to live their lives, trying to pay their bills, trying to have a health system that works, and just trying to put food on the table. So all of this is so wide-ranging, but I think what I've seen in all of this too, those things are really crucial for people. The people are just even generally aware that, hey, a lot of these issues come down to what we are fundamentally anchoring our policies on. And we know that the Judeo-Christian ethic, what it teaches, the foundations of it, that is a really strong basis for a strong society. So across the board, a lot of things, but I think we also have to go, okay, why has so much of these issues gone awry? And of course, you've got to look at how far we're venturing from our very poor foundations.
And as you say, there are vast distances from one end of WA to the other, and people have a whole lot of different values that they'll be bringing to the ballot box. And, we've got listeners in lots of those communities, hundreds of communities, in fact, right around WA. So they'll be very interested in the sorts of things you're talking about today. Let's get to a little bit of a prediction pointy end here. Darryl, Budge, when we think about what things will look like tomorrow night when the vote count is underway and when it gets to a point where someone can make the call, what do you think is going to happen?
Well, yeah, there's very little chance that we'll see a Liberal government coming into power. So the Labor government will obviously be dealing with a much narrower majority in the lower house. And in the upper house, I'm foreseeing quite a significant crossbench with a number of other key Liberals, I hope and pray, will be elected in the upper house as well. So I'm feeling like there will be a much, much narrower majority, and it may be, we hope so, the Labor government actually has to horse trade on its bills with a very vast 10 or 15 in the crossbench. And that's what it was like for the Liberal Party previously, that they actually had to do negotiations and do proper government. And what we've actually unfortunately had is that this House of Review that the upper house should be has been a rubber stamp for bills over and over and over again, and it just cannot proceed. And we just hope and pray that God protects our state, and we'll see Christian values returning into the House of Review and the upper house particularly.
Maryka, Groenwald, what's your prediction? Coming back to what we started talking about, there's the high likelihood that you could be elected tomorrow to the upper house in WA, but there's even these whispers that say there might be more than one Australian Christian elected there. What are your hopes and what are your predictions for the outcome overall?
Yeah, look, it's going to be interesting. Of course, we know that the upper house count won't be finalised for, a couple of weeks after tomorrow. But the overall hope is that, yes, by end of March, we'll hopefully have, 2 or more upper house members elected, which will be fantastic. But as Darryl shared too, look, it's going to be an interesting crossbench. And if anything, it's going to rein in pretty much Labor's unfettered power that they've had over the last 4 years, and I think that's a really good thing. Again, bringing some fresh people in there, raising the standard. You know, I was even thinking about this last week, the fact that we have become so used to this lazy, substandard way of looking at community and policy. I mean, it has to change. So I'm looking forward to perhaps a bit of an odd crossbench, but a good one nonetheless. You know, a few more Conservatives on side. Of course, Darryl mentioned Libs, but, you know, we're hoping that there'll be a few more other partners in there too that we can work alongside. And, of course, very clear now that Labor are working with Greens, Animal Justice, all these other parties on the other side. So I think it's going to be interesting to see, again, where these different alliances land as well.
Lazy, substandard, an interesting reflection on the Labor government, and it sounds like if there is some more balance that arrives in WA, the big winners will be the voters and the people of WA, because policy might be a little bit more thoughtful. Hey, we do have to draw a close to our conversation. It has been great getting an update. Let me just go through where listeners can get some snapshots and utilise the resources from a number of sources that will show just the comparison between what the parties stand for, whether it's on not only the economic issues but also these very, very important social issues. You can check out the Australian Christian Lobby. They've got a dedicated website called wavotes.org.au. There's also a one-page Christian values checklist at christianvalues.org.au. You can get the party survey detail at familyvoice.org.au, and you can just check the policies of the Australian Christians Party. And wondering what Christians stand for? That's going to be a very good example at australianchristians.org.au. And our two guests this hour, I want to thank very much Darryl Budge from Family Voice Australia, the Western Australian State Director. Darryl, thanks so much for joining us and giving us your insights.
Thank you, Neil.
And Maryka Groenwald, who leads the Australian Christians Party in WA, and expectant, hopeful that she'll be in that upper house in WA after Western Australian voters elect her tomorrow, and there might be some more as well. And as you say, Maryka, and I'm quite surprised to hear it, that you actually might have the most substantial number of candidates standing in electorates all over WA. And I know that there'll be a lot of people listening interstate who'll keep you in their prayers for a good showing at tomorrow's election. Maryka, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts and heart with us today on 2020.
Oh, I have loved it. Thank you so much, Neil.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.